Sure we got want to make sure everything comes up on the YouTube side first.
Everything's coming up, Millhouse.
That poor kid. All right. Yes, we do seem to be live. Welcome, everybody. My name is T. Alex Ratcliffe. I'm an author and YouTuber. Today we are interviewing John A. Douglas, the author of The Black Crown and a fellow YouTuber. How are you doing today, sir?
A little frantic, but hey, it's a day off after like 5 or 6 days of nonstop work. I actually don't know what to do with myself. I feel like going back to work just because I was so in the habit, in the zone, you know?
Oh, I know. Work becomes life and life becomes work.
It,
Go ahead.
it really does. And I found that out with my dad because in his later years, he worked so much. And like to this day, he'll sit down, watch TV show for 10 minutes and then walk outside and find something to do. It's like the man don't know how to stop working. And I think I'm kind of falling into that myself.
You just get antsy. You got to take that moment to calm down and just tell yourself it's going to be okay. Just have a break, have a breath, and have a drink.
Yeah, it's important. You got to know when to rest and decompress.
Well, I'm going to ask you the first of our questions here because your book, The Black Crown, would you like to tell the audience a little bit about it for those of us who haven't read it yet?
The Black Crown is a love letter, my love letter to classic epic adventures that are D&D styled, epic fantasy. And it wound up being something that it was just, it took a good 3 years to write this thing, just from the conception to the cooking part to the actual writing and getting it out the door. It was a lot of an undertaking for somebody that's been a hobby writer for most of my life. You'll hear my kids cough a little bit. That's kind of stuck in the back of my throat. So I got a little bit of frog voice going on. So if you'll excuse me, I'm going to be nursing that water a lot through this.
Well, if it weren't for children, germs would never survive.
Yeah, probably not, though. But anyway, and this wound up becoming the catalyst for me coming up with an entire fantasy world and a setting called the Age of Adventures, and the world that the Black Crown is set on called Allspire, and it's something that's starting to take shape. And it's facilitated a lot of new book ideas, series, and just a whole bunch of other ideas that I want to bring to the forefront once I actually get time to write.
Well, so that's the thing about writing that a lot of people will understand who've done it. It's just the hardest part's finding the time.
Yes, especially when I'm the only income earner in my family, and I have to be on. We were talking about this before the stream started. I just come off of 2 16s on time, and then after that 2 12s, and then an 8-hour, and then I worked an overnight shift after that. I've got the day off today, so this is the only day out today I can actually stream.
I don't know what that's like, but that's one of the reasons we do what we do here on YouTube, is so we can provide some entertainment for the people around us and try to encourage more people to get into the writing. So in your book, The Black Crown, your main character is a half-orc, and the orcs play a big role in the book.
Yeah.
Why did you choose orcs?
Mainly because, well, twofold. One, the orcs are my favorite fantasy race. I've always gravitated towards like the warrior races in different franchises. I like the balls to the wall attitude that a lot of them have, like the Klingons and the Krogans, and I always gravitate towards them. That even in a world of, like worlds of sci-fi, you still have these people who say, you know what, the best solution to this is to fight each other as hard as possible, and holding to warrior codes and in ages when you really don't even need them. But more than that, it just when I was looking into writing something for an epic fantasy, it's a heavily saturated genre. Everybody wants to make their mark and do it. I started to think about what I could do that could stand out. What would be different? What would be unique that would catch people's eye? Everything that I can do to try to help facilitate that is something that I try to implement in order to, provide both an experience that feels creatively and emotionally fulfilling for the reader, but also different enough that it feels, different from your standard, an average story. So I don't remember ever really seeing a whole lot of epic fantasy books centered around a half orc. And when you search those up in search engines or in Book Talk or whatnot, most of what you end up with is the monster romance books, because and that's the whole thing. But in the main genre itself, it's not well represented. So I felt, well, let's center the book on not just the half orc, who is a half orc prince, but also, make the central conflict about the orc structure of the orc society itself and how he affects it. Because I know where I wanted the book to end. I wanted the book to end the way it did, and with the idea that, what if the orcs had their own chosen one? What if the orcs had this ruler who was smarter than they were, more cunning and more capable, and they listened to him? How would what would this kind of a leader do going forward?
Well, tell us, since there's so many takes on orcs across so many different types of fiction, tell us what makes your orcs different. Give us kind of not an in-depth biology lesson, but kind of an overview of who they are and what they do.
I'm sorry, I got distracted by the chat in the lower half. That's funny. Right. They were modeled more on the World of Warcraft orcs, the big green guys, the tusks. And although I don't know their the lore for the World of Warcraft orcs all that well, I wasn't a big World of Warcraft player, but folks who have read the book said that the book does feel like D&D and Warcraft kind of mixed together in the same story.
A little bit. The backstory is a lot different, but it does feel a little like the World of Warcraft orcs.
My orcs are different in the sense that in the primal age of this world, they were humanoid apex predators, and that they were keenly they were able to hunt elves very keenly, and that kind of evolved over the centuries to be. They are a great warrior race, but their culture is very repressed, and a lot of their advancement that they have are what they steal from other cultures. And so they haven't really had that, one good leader that can kind of come in and say, this is how we should progress forward. Most of what they have is, the survival of the fittest. The strongest leader is the one that wins, and the strongest one that takes control, gets to be in charge for however long that goes. And the only thing that really unites them as a people is an outside enemy, which was the kind of what precipitated the Orc Wars.
Well, I noticed that, like, as you said, they've been imitating a lot of people. That's a sign that they're not stupid. Imitation does take some work. So is it only their anger that's holding them back?
It's the kind of the structure of the way their society works is what, the strife is the greatest thing. They're constantly everyone's in a battle with everyone else for fighting for, where they are in the structure of their society. They have to fight for everything. You saw that when you were in the Orc Village the Orc City chapters, where, just to get something done, you have to basically have a fight with another orc to assert the dominance and see if they respect you enough to back down, or they don't respect you enough and fight back. So that's what's stymied them the most from being able to advance, is an inability to cooperate in an effort to building their own people up. And the only time that they do that is when it comes to war. That was something that made Ragoth's father very effective, is that he was not just authoritative, he was very cunning. He was highly intelligent, and he recognized these problems too, but he was, taken out at the beginning, at the end of the Orc Wars, before he could really try and enact what he wanted to do. And to an extent, Ragoth kind of carries through with his plan and has a chance to actually succeed in that.
So to paraphrase from the chat, because we have a bit of a question, was this kind of a Genghis Khan situation?
Probably not. I'm a terrible student of history, so I'm not sure how that kind of ties in, although there are a lot of warrior tribes, but the orcs leadership essentially requires being the biggest and the baddest, even if you're not the smartest. That was one of the things about Gorvok's rule that stymied them. He was the biggest and the baddest, but he was more selfish in his rule, and a lot of the tribes that were that were left behind at the end of the Orc Wars didn't like how he carried himself and tried to center basically everything around him, being the grand poobah of all of them. And when he tried to enact, a lot of self-serving acts, since they couldn't beat him, a lot of tribes simply broke off and broke away and, split off to elsewhere until somebody could eventually usurp him.
Don't you complain how much creamer I put in there? You asked me to make it.
My wife made me coffee. Apparently she put too much creamer.
No, I said don't complain how much creamer I put in.
I won't complain. It's fine. Just give me the coffee, please.
Sit down.
Okay, sit the coffee down. Thank you.
I
appreciate it. Okay, that's hot. I'll leave that there for a moment.
We just made it, you idiot.
So we talked a little bit about your orcs. Tell us a little bit about your elves and what makes them such a threat to the orcs.
Again, this ties into when I try and think of what we have traditionally, the traditional conventions of fantasy, and do different. And I wanted in my you have to excuse I have a kid in the background. What I wanted to do different. Typically, we have elves that are forest dwellers, in touch with nature and magic, and I kind of moved them out of that element. The creation of the Crown Pantheon, the ruling body of Allspire, was the elves taking advantage of the chaos and the aftermath of the Age of Ruin to try and establish their own power structure. So most of the elves now, instead of being forest dwellers, they are city dwellers. They are in places of prominence, political power. Most of the Crown Pantheon is ruled by elves, and Nomaria is the sole kingdom that's ruled by humans. And because of how the elves are structured, they are authoritarians. They structure their society, the rules, and everything to benefit themselves. You mentioned in your review, like, the homogenous nature of the societies that they were going through, Silveria and the Dynasty, both of which are ruled by elves, and that was on purpose. That their society is very structured to give the elves an advantage in finance, political power, merchandise. In every aspect, the laws favor elves and people who live longer lives. Whereas, they see humans more or less as kind of essentially passing pets, because at some point the humans you meet are going to pass away very quickly, and you can just take advantage of the fact that they're not really able to build on their own generational power.
They're not able to utilize their advantages because the laws favor the elves' advantages of just naturally outliving them. Yeah,
exactly. And this has led to a situation, and I didn't touch on too much of this in the Black Crown because it wasn't as pertinent to the story, because the story was much more self-contained in Ragoth passing through these cultures. Like, I didn't want to delve into too much of the culture, because it would have padded the book out longer than it really is. And I'm already having trouble getting a hard book, a hardcover version of the book done. Something keeps going wrong with the formatting, and I'm working with my editor because it's right there at the line of how many pages you can have for a hardcover on Amazon. And we're trying to fix that right now, guys. I want to get a hardcover of the book out.
I have yet to do a hardcover myself. I'm sure they're tricky.
A little bit. It would be less tricky if the manuscript would actually cooperate, but like I said, we're working on that. And a lot of the cultural aspects for Allspire will come more into play in different books, and we'll have different books that are going to be set in like different areas of Allspire, and like book 2 is going to be taking place in the Empire of Nornrath, and book 3 will end up taking place on the Allurius coast. So you'll have a chance to look at different cultures and get much more of a broad view. There's a lot to learn about Allspire, but I like to keep the stories much more centered on the characters, because if you don't care about the characters, you're not going to care about what happens in the world around them.
Now, that being said, of the races that appear in your world to be able to give the elves a run for their money, I would say the dwarves look to be integrating fairly well. So I'm assuming they're fairly long-lived as well.
That's definitely a story that comes into play later. The dwarves have to cooperate with the elves because they have no choice. Their homeland was destroyed, so they don't have one. And everywhere in the history of Allspire, And I don't mind, like providing historical spoilers because I'm not doing prequels that go back and detail stuff that's happened before the start of the Black Crown.
Mm-hmm.
The dwarves essentially don't have a home of their own, and everywhere that they've tried to settle for a home of their own has been stepping on the toes of another kingdom, another royalty. So a lot of them settling somewhere has to come at great expense to themselves. So they've essentially integrated into a lot of the Crown Pantheon society as architects, builders. The Rockbrow Rebellion that was mentioned in the book was because the dwarves were promised a stronghold, a basically little plot of land of their own with their own ruler if they built the Rockbrow Traverse, which is commonly referred to as the Dwarf Road. When they finished that and they didn't, Sothron went back on his word because he's a massive dick. And that caused the dwarf, who was viewed as the Dwarf King, because he came from the line of the kings, Rockbrow himself, initiated a rebellion against them. And that was mentioned in the Black Crown, but it was also significant because of the last historical war that Ragoth learned before his education about recent history was shut off.
It's interesting. We have a question from the audience. John, what authors do you compare your prose style to?
I don't really try to intimate that I'm like anybody else. I like that people say in my prose feels like old school fantasy, like the Weiss and Hickmans of the world. And it's one of them things where I'm not trying to emulate any style or any author. I just write how I write, and I write in a way that makes sense to me in the way I tell a story. But if I had to pick something, if you've ever read Weiss or Hickman, the old Dragonlance novels, it's probably close to that. The old Forgotten Realms novels too.
Were you a big fan of those particular books?
They were what got me into fantasy to begin with. I'm thinking I have it over here somewhere. It's buried. I'm not going to dig it out. Or is it right there? No, it is right there. Hey, there it is. The Crystal Shard was my first fantasy book. Read it back in the late 90s. And it didn't hook me just yet. It was interesting. I read this because a friend who was really into JRPGs and D&D insisted that I read this. Like, dude, you got to get this so we can get on the same level. And I read it, and it was okay. I've been reading Star Wars Expanded Universe up to that point. But I wound up reading Dragonlance, and I got really invested in that trilogy. And then I went back to Forgotten Realms, and I started reading the Drizzt novels. And from there, I just kind of went on. And if it was fantasy, I just picked it up and read it. I loved it.
I have heard a lot about the Dragonlance series. I haven't read any of the books yet, strangely enough. But if you're anything like me, your TBR pile reaches over your house. So,
well, if you have to pick a starting point, right there, Dragons of Autumn, Twilight. At the very least, the first trilogy is worth reading because it's literally just a novelized version of their D&D campaign they had going on. And it was wonderful to read. There's over 200 Dragonlance novels. Not all of them written by Weiss and Hickman. They had a lot of other stuff, but they had also a lot of side stories, prequels, individual character adventures. So if you just love fantasy adventure and you don't mind going different places in the world, Dragonlance is a good place to jump in, and you could swim in that pool forever.
Currently, the one I'm trying to get through, at least series wise, is the Discworld series.
Oh yeah, I have read some Terry Pratchett, but it's been a long time since I went back to him. I love his sense of humor, and one of my favorites was not everybody's favorite. I love Pyramids. Oddly enough,
I haven't gotten to that one yet.
That one was funny to me. I read a couple of the other ones. I don't remember exactly which ones. It was a long time ago, but I remember loving these, and I was always meant to go back, and I never did.
Well, let's get back to your universe. So, outside of orcs, what's your favorite race that exists in your world of Allspire?
I haven't delved into them too much, but the goblinoids are a lot of fun. differentiated from the feral goblins, which are more bestial in nature. The goblins. One of the things I wanted to do with Allspire is push a little farther forward in time past the medieval stage, right? There's a lot of aspects of medieval life, but Allspire's on the cusp of a industrial revolution powered by magic enchantments. You'd probably noticed in the book the proliferation of things like glowstones. Even low-income houses and communities have abundant light, filtered water, climate-controlled homes, all thanks to magic enchanted items that are easily affordable.
Mhm.
So they haven't quite gotten to vehicles just yet, but within a few years they could. And I did that with a lot of the races too. Like the orcs are a lot less bestial than they used to be. They're much more humanoid and capable of integrating to society if they're able to adapt to that. Even if a lot of their more baser instincts are still left with them. The ability of Ragoth to smell elves with whenever they were within his vicinity was something I came up with on the fly halfway through the novel, and it became a good plot point. But it also became something that I added to the world building, where it was a lingering natural advantage that the orcs had because they used to hunt elves back in the day.
So were elves a primary food source of the orcs?
Essentially, yes. I mean, the orcs will eat just about anything that's alive, but in the very primal age, yeah, they did kind of hunt them. And now they're kind of past that point where eating an elf would essentially be something they would do after they beat them in battle, right? And even that is kind of on the wane, and something in future novels, Rags will be like, yeah, okay, guys, we're gonna try and put a little stop to this, even though the elves are still very much their enemies. But the goblins are another one that are starting to pop up a lot more, in that they're in small numbers. If they're able to integrate into communities to some extent, people will tolerate them.
Now, I did notice in your book you have a tremendous amount of half-breeds. Is this a common feature?
Well, it's kind of how the book started. Was me messing around with D&D builds and thinking, what can I come up with? What would you get if you mixed half this, half that? What kind of features would you get in a character? Ironically enough, the first building block of Allspire and the Black Crown and everything didn't start with Rags. It started with Ollie, who had a different name back then, but her original name was Ozzy. And my beta readers kept making fun of him, making Ozzy Osbourne references. I'm like, okay, let's shut that shit down and change her name. Because I thought, what is the weirdest half breed in a fantasy experiment I could come up with? I thought, what if you had a half elf and a half goblin? What would that offspring look like? And essentially, Ollie is a short green elf for all intents and purposes, but she's very much got like the vulgar attitude of a goblin. And I thought, okay, what if she had a half sister who was half orc and half goblin? And then I came up with Iggy, who is like this little bundle of green violence, a little green Tasmanian devil. And from there, I thought, okay, what about a half orc? Who typically, when you think half orcs, they're usually bruisers. They're more intelligent than an orc, less intelligent than a human.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been a big believer in like the video game mechanics of brawn and brain. But the question I asked myself is, what if you had a half orc who is essentially a runt, but he was really smart? And then what if the orcs were following this guy? Okay, I've got an interesting premise for a book. How did he get to that point? And then I start working that story. I worked the story backwards until I got to the point that I wanted to start with.
Okay, that's now Iggy. Izzy was an interesting character. Your half breed goblin. I'm thinking now. Wait a minute. One of them's about 50 years old. One of them's younger.
Yeah,
and they're sisters. Rag's dad was a busy fella.
A little bit. Well, Ollie is not Thorgoth's daughter, though. Iggy is. Iggy and Ollie share a mother who was a goblin brothel worker.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, they're like cast-off kids.
Right.
Ollie's older because she's part elf. She's been, and that was kind of a joke with her, is that she's been around for a lot longer than she actually looks.
So what does that mean? Now I was just curious about how long goblins live, considering that they have a common ancestor, or their mother is the same person.
By themselves, goblins live, if they live that long, can live to about 50 years old. But when you start adding in the longevity of other races to that, it can get extended.
Now, you also have a lot of half human, half elves. So,
yeah. And a reason for that is because something that I didn't touch on in the book that will probably get mentioned in some lore dumps later on is elves are, even though they're in the power structure of Allspire, they're not as numerous as a lot of other races, say, put together. But elves have this particular physiology quirk to them where a full-blooded elf in order to be born takes 100 years. A male and a female elf have to be together, and only them together with each other, for a period of 100 years before their physiology, it basically accepts that that's their lifelong mate. And then they'll have a child. And usually most elves don't have much more than, say, 2 to 3 children, because it takes so long for their bodies to understand that. That's just a quirk of their physiology. It's led to a lot of elves getting together with human partners because it doesn't require that. It's the normal human 9-month gestation period for an elf and a human child. And the half elves only live to about 150. But for a lot of elves, if there's not a lot of partner choices around, that was a compromise they chose, even though most of them will outlive their child.
So is that true regardless of who's the male and who's the female in the relationship?
Yes. Yes.
So humans are just kind of, the elves kind of treat humans as a natural way to kind of increase their numbers, but not really.
A little bit, yeah. There's a bit of a tenuous, there's kind of a bit of a that whole element of, well, you're half elf, so you're not quite pure-blooded enough. Some of them are very, some of the elves are very snotty and uppity about that kind of thing. But that's more in like the upper class societies, whereas elves that are in lower classes don't really always have that luxury. Mm-hmm. So, and you can't help who you fall in love with either.
That is very true. Well, so let's see here. So out of all media that you've ever read, not just fiction, but science fiction and others in between, what's your favorite fictional race?
It's still orcs.
Still orcs?
Oh, you're asking besides orcs?
Yes, let's say besides orcs.
Well, besides orcs, I'd probably say I really like the kind of bro attitude that dwarves give off. Mm-hmm. In fact, I've always often kind of wondered that if you look at the way dwarves are and the way orcs are, they're actually a lot more similar than they are different. Mm-hmm. And it kind of makes me wonder why they do. If it wasn't for the fact they hate each other, they could just team up and hate the elves too.
It's more of a we have too much in common to like each other kind of situation.
And that's a weird thing too. I've noticed that you come across people in your life sometimes where you share like every opinion together, but for some reason you can't stand each other. And it's weird, but sometimes that just happens. I'll use an example. Well, no, it's a bad example. I can't think of another example, but I've come across like characters, people that I've known, and I'll share every single opinion. Can't stand them though.
I don't think I have quite run into that particular problem yet.
I've worked in construction, medical, a lot of different jobs in my time. I've met a lot of different people.
Oh, same. So in your world, orcs kind of live in a fractured society, and they can't really integrate into normal society, but it looks like they might be coming to a point where they can. What kind of role would orcs fulfill if they were integrated into society? What do you think they could do to help ingratiate themselves?
Well, the trick first would be the plot fodder for the sequel, which would be Ragoth trying to reunite the scattered tribes into his fold. Mm-hmm. and that'll be the crux of book 2, because and he's got to do it before the Crown Pantheon realizes, oh, the orcs are centered around a new figurehead. We've got to put a stop to this before the Orc Wars happen again. Their fear of the orcs was justified during the Orc Wars. Now, for the orcs, because that was a little bit of gray area. That was a matter of survival as well, in that they couldn't find a place to actually settle and establish themselves without being run off first. So in order to mitigate the danger of armies coming after them, they had to join forces with more and more orcs, until eventually they had a massive horde that was constantly on the move, constantly fighting, and constantly trying to evade the armies that were, trying to take them out at the time.
Mm-hmm.
They're scattered now, and Rags will have to deal with the 5 main tribes in the Valley of Dreadmore coming to his side and convincing the leaders of those tribes to join his side rather than challenge him for leadership, which is a little harder because most of the heads of the 5 scattered tribes are actually blood related to him. And if you read the Black Crown, you know that that's the one weakness of the Black Crown itself. It has an influence, a passive influence over orcs,
mm-hmm.
but it doesn't work on anyone that's closely blood related to him. And the biggest part of this tribe would be one of the major characters I introduce in the sequel, which is Tharla, his sister, who is a master, a very accomplished warrior, and somebody who would be much harder for him to take in a one-on-one fight. I can't stress enough how Ragoth's fight with Gorvok came down to a lot of cunning and a lot of sheer dumb luck on his part. And he won't necessarily get that with every single fight.
Well, I imagine in his fight with his uncle, there was a lot of underestimation just due to his size and where he came from. Now that he's the leader of the biggest tribe, he's not going to be as underestimated.
Right. 2 of the tribes are led by Gorvok's sons, and they don't like each other, and them together don't like Tharla. And you can see where kind of trying to draw them all together would make, for a very challenging situation for Rags.
A bit like herding monstrously powerful cats.
Right. That's a good analogy. That is actually a much more astute analogy. I may have to use that in the book.
All we have to do is get the tiger and the lion and the other bigger, meaner tiger to get along with each other.
Right. How hard could it be?
I mean, they both like to eat the same things and people, so.
That's a good point. Yeah, and so Rags has a lot of high-minded ideals. He has a vision, and that's the vision for what orcs can be, which is not so much less warlike, but less infighting, and that gives their society a chance to actually establish a new kind of structure where they can thrive. But until he can get to a point where he has enough orcs to fend off an attack by the Crown Pantheon, he'll never get the chance. So a lot of it's all down to, we've got to cooperate now before our common enemy comes to destroy us.
So for the people in our audience who may not know, tell us a little bit about the Crown Pantheon and how they work and why.
The Crown Pantheon is a collective of kingdoms and empires that controls every aspect of the continent of Evergrad. And it's seven heads, mostly elves. Let's see, you got Silveria, the dynasty, Namaria, which is ruled by humans, Nornrath, Macavia, the Illyrius coast, and the Phelan jungles. And I'll get into the plot aspects in later books of how their unification against the orcs was a very remarkable and rare instance of them working together to eliminate what they finally came to see was a genuine threat. Outside of that particular circumstance, many of these kingdoms and nations, particularly Macavia and Nornrath, do not like Sothran and the rest of the Crown Pantheon. Mm-hmm. But what they are essentially are authoritarians, and it took a little bit of inspiration from our own government, where they are not necessarily friends with each other. but they will work together to maintain their own power. And a civil war with each other would, disrupt that. So they would rather be in charge than risk losing any of their influence or power just by fighting each other.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I did notice about your story is you really didn't shy away from a lot of the more uncomfortable aspects of things, like how the half orcs came about, the fact that they weren't
Yeah.
able to be so easily removed. Was this an intentional choice? Because I noticed you had a lot of things that were fairly uncomfortable to deal with that most authors would have skimmed over.
Well, I didn't do it I didn't do it to glorify it.
Right.
War is hell, and it's hell for a reason. But I didn't want to, go full grimdark in exploring these issues. But in the aftermath of war, there are usually bastards left behind,
Right. Obviously.
and believe me, the Orc Wars, there were plenty of atrocities to go around on all sides. The Orcs were not wholly and singularly evil or reviled in what they did. There were terrible things that were done to them as well. Some were earned, some were unearned, but such is the way of actual conflict. The story of the Black Crown is a lot of people moving on, and the pieces that are left behind, and how those people, how those kind of half orc pieces are able to, how do I fit into a society that hates me?
Right.
Where is there for a place for me to belong? And this is the thing that Rags recognizes through the journey that he takes, and it informs in on his decision to do what he does at the end of the book, or rather than choose a path of revenge or a path of peace. Instead, instead of path A or path B, I'll forge a path C for myself, and in defiance of the circumstances that led him there.
Now, you do have one orc in your story who's kind of integrated a little bit. I think that was Long Tusk, where
Yeah.
he became kind of a mob boss. Is this going to be kind of a common thing as orcs integrate, or are they going to go more towards the crime side of things? Or might since there's not really adventurers guilds anymore?
Well, as the Black Crown series continues, a lot of the Black Crown going forward is going to be staying mostly in Dreadmore, because Dreadmore is now their home, and now they have to consolidate their power at their home and defend their home, and try to establish their base of power there. So it'll be a while before that Ragoth's presence now as the heir of the Black Crown is drawing orcs to him in the sequel. That prediction that he made at the end of the book is now something that's going to come to fruition in the sequel, where he's not just trying to unite these tribes, but having to take in the other orcs that are tribes from scattered across Allspire that have heard that he's there and are constantly, this constant influx of new tribes trying to join him. But also the half orcs of Allspire hearing that there's a place for me that's away from all of this, and I can go there. And the Crown Pantheon discovering where'd all our half orc laborers go. What's up with, not that they were ingrained to them, but it's suspicious enough. It warrants enough suspicion to for them to start looking into it and the consequences of what comes from that.
Right. I mean, you would be curious if you've had these people working for you your entire life, and suddenly they're gone.
Very much so. And I'm really looking forward to that, but that's a few books. Got a few more books to get out of the way before that. But every book I do is going to have some kind of, and the Age of Adventure is going to have some kind of aspect of this. In book 2, The Lionheart, which takes place in Nornrath, the orcs are integrated into that society in the form of the Sandstorm Guard, which is essentially the primary police force for the capital of Imperiax, where the story takes place. In fact, the second POV character for that book is an orc guard, and you get to kind of see how these orcs are these desert-based orcs are a little different and kind of, but they have a lot of similarities. But I try to put orcs in everything, man. They're my favorite fantasy race. It's fun.
A big fan of the Greenskins.
Well, when I started out this, and I said I'm going to do this book, it's going to be about orcs. I've tried to stay on that brand, right? And anything I can do to make myself stand out from, other authors and, others in the genre always helps. So I kind of stay on brand in that, I'm the orc guy now. There wasn't really an orc guy before. I can be the orc guy. That's cool. You build an identity, a brand for yourself as an author in a lot of different ways. And to me, this was just one way to do it because it's unique enough that it's not very prominent. The only other orc authors I've come across, I interviewed one very recently, Destin J. Munden, who is so alike in thinking with me and how we write and what we enjoy. I'm starting to think he's a multiverse variant of myself. And he just came out with a orc-based book called Tavern. He had it released before, and then a small publisher picked him up, and now it's been re-released, and I'm waiting on my copy to come in.
Huh. That does sound interesting.
Yeah.
Can you give us like a little brief, not meaning to promote anybody else, but just give us a little brief synopsis of the story?
Oh, I'll always stop what I'm doing and shill somebody else. I'm happy to do that. We need it. I think we, arguably, I promote other people more than I promote myself. Essentially, it takes a little, just kind of paraphrasing all the story. It takes place in his fantasy world. And his main character is a orc tavern keeper named Zell, who gets drawn back into a much more of a politically aligned kind of a story. God, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm better with words when I write than when I talk.
That's a common thing when you're more in practice with writing than talking.
I've maintained that since the very beginning, that I am a better writer than I am a speaker. But the YouTube channel was an effort to try and develop my speaking skills a lot better. And I'd say I'm marginally better than when I started. I can definitely sit down now on a live stream and just go, right? Whereas my pre-recorded videos take a little longer. And you don't see the outtakes, which is just me talking for 10 seconds, pause for 5 while I sit here in silence and think about what to say next. And then talk for another 15, 20 seconds, and then another 20-second pause. Thank God Filmora has this AI silence remover feature where I can just cut all that out. Unfortunately, it does tend to cut off the beginning of and end of some words. So sometimes it just sounds like noise. That's a little disjointed.
I kind of wish I had a tool like that, but when I'm recording in Audacity, I mostly have to just go through. It's like, okay, here's an extra take. Didn't much care for that. Don't like how I phrase that. And then it's just
When I do that, when I'm editing for Filmora, what I'll do, because I am on camera, if I want to eliminate that take, I'll do this. So when I'm editing later, I know to go back to cut what came before that. It's really helped. Or when my wife comes in to talk to me, I'll just do this to the camera so that I know later when I see my hands up, I'm like, okay, cut out the wife talking part.
No one wants to hear that. No.
She's been a blessing. She indulges my my live stream times, but she doesn't take this quite as seriously as I do at times. So that's why we'll have moments like what happened earlier where she'll come in and she'll have to ask me a question, or she'll want to show me a news story on her phone. and she'll like, this really ain't that serious. I'm like, yeah, but I'm talking to people. It's a little bit, she like, forget it. And everyone who watches me though now kind of is used to it.
I noticed that in the chat that she has her own little fan club going on.
It's a lot of fun. You can't take this stuff too seriously.
No.
Although occasionally when I have a big guest, like when I have Razor Fist on, I have to tell her, okay, look, this is important. Don't come in here and start fucking with me.
Oh, you had Razor Fist on, did you?
I did a while ago, and I was shocked that he accepted the invite and brought him on. And we had a great discussion about pulp novels, writing in general. It was great, and the Razor Force showed out in force. It was,
I really do like Razor Fist, but I'm afraid he might not come on my channel after what I said about his first 2 books.
Oh Lord, I think I'm, and you had some critique from me, and that's fine. You gave critique in fair, in good faith, and I can always accept that because you're never going to really grow or learn as a writer if you can't take it and get a consensus from what people are saying. I've had some 1-star reviews were obviously from people that didn't read the book and just don't like me on Twitter. So, they try and review bomb. Not that many. And let's be fair. I treat Twitter a little bit like Thunderdome. So I expect some of this flack to come my way occasionally. But I'm always willing to, accept what other people didn't like. And I've heard some of the criticisms about the Black Crown. Even someone who loved the book was like, they didn't like the prologue. And like, okay, I don't know how else I could write the book other than the way it's presented now. So it is what it is. But I understand some folks were not big on the prologue, even though it does set up a lot of points that come on later down the line. If I'm going to do and I've kind of taken that step in my future books where I kind of like, okay, prologue over quickly, get much closer to the action. The Lionheart is going to hit the ground running. In comparison to the Black Crown, because the Black Crown does take a few chapters to get going, and but once it gets going, it stays going, and to me, I kind of like that slow burn a little bit.
Well, you're never going to like every aspect of every story. You're always going to have parts that you're going to like less, but they're necessary for something later. It's impossible to have everything 10 out of 10 all the time.
Yeah, this was what, in developing the characters, when it came to the idea of I need this information out there in the world to help develop it, but how can I deliver it? Turning Rags essentially into a walking ability to like small lore dump here and there with his, extensive knowledge, his perfect recall, not only helped where you're getting to new locations. He's like, oh, I've read about this place. It's this and this and this and this. And everybody else is kind of tuning him out because he's just blathering on stuff that they already know, but the audience doesn't. But it also helped to explain, like, how he would know things he couldn't possibly know, being as isolated as he was. Like when he picked the lock, or when he knows what wood to get, what makes the best firewood, little things like that. And so, he go ahead.
He's got the book smarts, but he doesn't have the practical application just yet.
That's how him and Court are diametrically opposed to each other. Is Rags is book smart, but not street smart. Court is street smart, but not book smart. And so they complement each other in that area.
Court was a difficult character to like. I did like him. But he would do, right when I'd start to like him, he'd do something that's like, why'd you do that? I don't like you now. And then he'd do something a little later. Okay, maybe I like you a little bit. He
was definitely a risk because I had this moment when I was initially writing the book very early on. If you remember the scene where they take refuge in the barn, and that's where Denny makes the decision to go with him. Early on, I had all three, Court and Denny, make that promise to him, and something in my gut didn't settle right. I didn't quite know how to put it, so I let it sit for a few days, and I went back and I reread the book from the start up to that point, and I realized this horrifying realization that I could not tell their dialogue apart. I had written essentially 3 flavors of the same character. So back to the character drawing board, and I thought, okay, these characters need to be much more distinct from each other. This was where Denny ended up becoming demure, much more kind of, a subdued personality, compassionate. And Court, I leaned the exact opposite way into it. And I started to think about antagonistic best friends like Vegeta or Bakugo or Knuckles, where their whole attitude is they're going to stay by your side, but they're going to give you shit the whole time they're doing it. And that was where the whole dynamic of the book completely changed. And instead of, having Court kind of lean back and going, yeah, guys, I've been kind of a dick, I kind of leaned more in the favor of him going, yeah, I'm a dick. And it just lean into it. When it comes to his dickishness, I just kind of lean into that anger, the temper, the chip on his shoulder. And, rather than walk it back and make him more humble, even when he was humbled, he would admit, hey, I was wrong about this, but still have, that persnickety aspect of his nature, because that's just who he is. He believes he's a bigger fish in a small pond. Even when he gets out into the larger ocean, he still acts like a big fish.
He does have a distinct personality that follows him around. I'm glad that he did have that. A lot of people I've seen in their first book are tempted to just, change the character whenever they feel like in order to make him fit into that moment of the story. But Court doesn't do that. He's just kind of who he is everywhere he goes. Like, I'm mad, I'm angry, and any problem I run across, I'm going to beat it. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to beat it harder.
That's exactly him. And it lends itself to, just some of the best moments of the book. I'm actually going to share something with you in a second here. I had to put it on my drive, though. I'll download it.
Mm-hmm.
That's just that was the great thing about Court, is that I didn't have to tone him down too much. And in leaning into that character, it really made him stand out.
Looks like we lost somebody here. Hang on a second, folks. We'll see if we can't get him back. This is the first time this has ever happened. Let me see what I can do for us, folks. Hopefully I can bring him back in real quick. Oh no, not his wife pulling the plug. I don't know if that means if he'll be back or not. Well, our loved ones do all sorts of crazy things. To go eat dinner. Dinner is highly overrated. We're all too fat as a country and as a world. Oh, there he is. Hang on one second.
Okay,
Welcome
so I
back.
closed out the wrong window. What was I saying?
You were going to share something with us.
Yeah, I was talking about character creation for a second and close the wrong window. Okay, come on now, download it. Yeah, let me download this real quick. This is new. This has not been seen yet. Oh, I closed StreamYard. That's why I did that.
It does tend to do that.
Hold on. This is taking a second. Oh, no, wait. It's got to be a PDF. You know what? I'm just going to bring it up on my computer. And we can click on it from there. We can just share the screen. Hold on. Damn it. I'm not good at doing this really on the fly. Here we go.
To the choir.
Okay, here we go. Here we go. Share screen. There. Okay. Oh, window. Here we. Okay. All right. There we go.
All right. Let's see.
I had a lot of art done, and I recently started getting some art. I didn't have a good art pick for Court, so I got some good artwork of Court.
He certainly looks different than I thought he was going to, but that actually fits with how he's presented in the book.
Yeah. There's the only thing that I really changed is, because this is for future purposes as well, is in book 2, Court has to deal with the fact that he made a deal with Longtusk. And part of that, something I went back and changed at the last second in the last few weeks before this got published, is Court's signature weapon, which he's holding right there, which is the club, the spiked club that he's wielding. And the story behind that's going to be really fun. But I wanted to, for future purposes, I wanted the weapon to be in his hand instead of the Nick's sword he had.
Mm-hmm.
God, my voice is going out.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm trying as best I can. I just had started a cough this week. It's not that bad, but you hear what it's doing to my throat.
Oh, I've been there. Trust me. Once you talk so much and you start getting a little bit of the touch of the sickness, you start getting.
Yeah. And have you seen the other artwork that I have for the characters?
You have shown me, but if you want to throw it on the stream here, you're more than welcome to.
This is now this one. The Court art is done by Josanne, who does artwork for Paladin Dragoon Rider. This was done by the extremely talented Neutron Boar. He captured Rags exceptionally well here.
He does certainly have a more human than orc feel in this.
Yeah, that's what I wanted from him. I wanted him to kind of, I didn't want him to have kind of that aspect of him being a runt, because he's just average human size. But in orc society, he's considered a runt.
So far, orc society seems rather cruel.
Yeah. And I've shown you this before. This was the artwork for Mora. I got a particular type of artist that's used to drawing girls with muscles in order to get this one done. The only thing that I didn't care for, because I was waffled back and forth on the book over what her weapon would be. Mora is one of those characters that it doesn't matter. She doesn't have a signature weapon per se. She essentially is the weapon. Anything she picks up is going to be lethal, even if she doesn't pick up a weapon at all.
Well, she is roughly 8 or 9 feet tall and ridiculously strong.
She's 7 feet tall.
Oh, okay.
And not including the horns. So she is big, but and she is ridiculously strong. But I was thinking of like a hammer axe combo of some sort, and that's the weapon that the artist drew. Ultimately, I decided on a mace because I was trying to avoid redundancy with other people's weapons. I initially wanted her to have an axe, but there's not a whole lot of chances for her to use it before she loses her weapon, right? Because she throws it at one point, and that's the last you see of it. So I figured I'd give her a mace that was disposable, essentially.
So she just uses whatever she can get her hands on at the time.
Yeah, it's like she's got a stash, but that's what she was carrying at the time she left. And let's see here. This artist nailed Denny perfectly. I could not come up with, I could not ask them to do anything to this to make it better, because this is Denny's demeanor and look to a T.
That is a very diminutive elf right there.
Yes. and Denny, and creating, wanting to come up with this party, and every member of the party that I came up with for the Black Crown was an attempt to, be slightly different than what your expectation of the convention was. And the elf is usually a hunter with a bow and arrow or uses magic. Denny was none of those things. And it was to bring in this character whose only addition to the party was essentially moral support. And, Rags demonstrating the kind of a good-natured person that he is, and not, wanting to kick this kind of character to the side, even when Court did want to do that.
The Court doesn't seem to have a very long view of things.
No. He's very, looks 2 steps ahead. And if there's anything beyond those 2 steps, punch it. But to be in his defense, it's worked very well in the past.
Yes. And I could also understand a lot of where he was coming from, because it does seem to be a very hostile world. And Denny does not seem to be that useful.
No. I do have a picture of Princess Ani, but I have to kind of comb through my pictures on Twitter a little bit. If you will indulge me a second.
I'll take your time.
I can bring that up. And I didn't know if we wanted to get into any spoilers or not, for the benefit of those who are not who have not read the book. Oh, wait, there it is.
That is entirely up to you, as it is your story to spoil.
Ask the chat who's listening. I mean, we can always throw up a quick spoiler warning beforehand, because I haven't talked too many spoilers with people. Let me see here. Okay, last one, guys. Last one. This one will be a screenshot. No, wait. Share screen. There we go. This one was another one that was perfectly nailed by the art. Is the same artist for Denny, and this is Princess Ani. And the wound on her side is supposed to look more like a very large slash wound, but this was very haunting as well.
In this case, it looks like a big burn, or like somebody attacked her with a giant potato peeler.
It does, but it still gets the same effect across. In that, when you see a lot of characters in fantasy that have scars, usually they're arranged in a way that makes them, look badass. They're cool. I wanted to go for the effect of this scar was very off-putting. And the kind of scar that when you look at it, you stop and you go, oh shit, what the fuck happened? And that still gets across in this art. If no, yeah, I'm the same way, Porcelain Chips. If nobody complains, I don't mind going into the spoilers. Alex, if you have any like spoiler-esque questions.
Oh, tell us a little bit about the Sorcerer King, because he seems to be a major historical figure, and he is one of Rags' descendants, or Rags' not descendants, ancestors.
Yeah, right. I'm going to text my wife to bring me some water. I done gone through all that water.
Hey, I always keep a big old thing of liquid with me whenever I live stream.
I've gone through this, and this is almost done too. And my voice is on a crutch here. I will actually link you in the chat here real quick. I have a playlist on my YouTube channel of why is it on my wife's account? She's been sitting in my computer recently, I think. On my account, I have a playlist called Age of Adventures, and it's only 6 videos so far, but what it is both the rules for Allspire as well as extended lore dumps about the history and lore of the world. And I have one specifically for Selrock the God Sorcerer. I'll spell the T on him, but for anyone that cares, I'm going to put this in the chat as well, so that you can click on it at your leisure. Because this was again, I'm not saving his story for some future prequel. I am very much going through, and I'm not going into the past, into much of these characters.
Right.
Here we go. Let me drop it. Right. All right. There's the link. Drop it in the chat. Oh wait, you gotta drop that. Let me put it in the private chat. It's not going to pop up as clickable unless you put it in there. Okay. Hey, Stormcrow, good to see you, sir. Selrock was essentially the Sauron of the world, only in the sense that he had all but essentially conquered and totally wiped out most of Allspire by the time he rose to power. And there's a bit of that whole last alliance, final battle against him that pops up, wherein he was fending off both an usurping attempt from his generals from within, as well as a final battle around his fortress. He was a sorcerer who had no upper limit. And in this endeavor, he almost attained godhood. And when he did that, when he was at the cusp of it during that final battle, the gods themselves stepped out of the heavens and basically nuked him off the face of Allspire.
So they said nope, and then blew him up.
They said nope. Now, whether they felt threatened by him becoming a god, or they saw it as some kind of heresy, they didn't want him in their ranks, they just didn't like him, or they didn't want mortals to do that. Whatever the cause, they put a stop to it. And then the gods retreated, and a lot of their power kind of disappeared from the face of Allspire in the aftermath of that. And because of how powerful he was, because sorcerers, comparative to wizards and magi, sorcerers do not need the incantations. They don't need a conduit, because their magic dwell comes from within them. They essentially are a living conduit. And that gives them a bit of an advantage over wizards. The wizards and the magi, when they formed the arcane order, were so fearful that another Selrock might arise that they made sorcery basically their enemy number one. And you don't become a sorcerer, you're born a sorcerer. And if you're found to be a sorcerer, it doesn't matter how old you are or whether you have aspirations of being a magic user or not, they kill you. They execute you, because they do not want to take the risk of another Selrock becoming forming. And
I mean, that is understandable considering what they've gone through in the past.
he damn near did almost end the world.
Mm-hmm.
And the Age of Ruin, the centuries that followed his death, were pretty much apocalyptic in that the races almost did not survive. They survived in very small communities that were heavily fortified until they could get to a point where they were numerous enough and powerful enough to expand further. And then naturally, by that point, you had the start of the Age of Crowns when they started going to war with each other, pushing the monsters out of, where they lived. And then they started to go with war with each other. And that led to the creation of the Arcane Order, the Crown Pantheon, and the structures of power that endured and brought stability to Allspire well enough in order to form the Age of Adventures, which we are currently in the tail end of.
Okay. So let's get a little bit off of books in general. I wanted, since I talked to a lot of, well, not off of books, we're still on books. What's your opinion of the current fantasy book genre? Like where we stand and how things are going?
From the trad pub aspect, fantasy is kind of shifted gears away from it being geared mostly as men's fiction to being primarily driven by a lot of female readerships. I've been looking into a lot of Bookstagram and Book Talk lately, just to kind of, because I like to keep my finger on the pulse of what other people are reading, what's coming out of trad pub, what's coming out of the indies. What's primarily driving a lot of book readership in these communities is the female-centered, female-written, female-centered, and female-read books in like romantasy, dark fantasy. And, these are books that are not really geared towards, men's adventure, men's fiction.
Mm-hmm.
So, you've got outliers where you have authors that appeal to both sides, to both sexes too. One such is one that I've been harping on for a while. Gonna make a mess of things. Sarah Douglas, who very much had aspects that men and women can enjoy, but it were there's not as many of those these days. If you're looking for more what feels like the mainstream fantasy appeal that we used to get in the 90s and the 2000s or so, that's coming out of indie fantasy. That's where the indie authors have started to pop up and really deliver such a wide variety of content and stories and books. You can find stuff that feels safe and familiar, the kind of adventures you just love going on in the past, or stuff that challenges you, stuff that breaks the status quo. A lot of that's coming out of the indie spaces. Lit RPGs have blown up a lot. That is a very popular genre that's popped up in the last, say, 6 to 7 years. That's found its footing. Romantasy as a genre has found its footing both in the indie and the trad pub spaces. So,
do me a favor here, John. Entertain everybody for just 1 second. I have a phone call coming in.
I hear you, and I'm going to text my wife again to try and get her to bring me some water because I've been texting her. Hold on, I'm just going to mute myself real quick. I have to communicate via yelling because she's not listening. She's not answering my text. Story of my life. When it comes, for my money, indie fantasy is where all the innovation is, and a lot of conversations and the pluses and minuses of that have really popped up as of late. Because in the early days of self-publishing off of Amazon, the fear was that it was a bunch of self-edited slop, things that didn't have great quality control. I'm dying here. Please get me some water. Huh? Yes, I hear you. I'm trying to talk to people watching the stream. Please get me some water. My throat is dying. I sound like a frog that is drowning in oil. Please help me. I'm begging you. Take that.
You know, you got 15 minutes.
Right.
I'm glad I came back to domestic abuse.
Get me some water. I'm dying here. So anyway, we have kind of come through the space of people looking down their nose at indie fantasy and indie books, and seeing that, you know, indie authors are really treating their books with the kind of care that they would if it was traditionally published. They're hiring editors, they're hiring book cover artists, and they are making, you know, their mark felt. The cream is rising to the top, and you have new fantasy writers, new rock and roll stars in this field that are making their mark, and I wouldn't doubt end up breaking through into mainstream at certain points. Thank you, sweetie. I agree. Porcelain ships, romantasy is definitely has a different kind of an appeal than traditional, and I like a little bit of romance in my stories. You know, I've always been a bit of a romantic at heart. I read R.H. Snow's Watcher of the Damned, which is essentially Beauty and the Beast set in Fallout, Texas. But I love that. And I really liked how she kind of, you know, came through in her stories. You find the right author that appeals to your senses and knows how to appeal to you, what you like. You know, that can be hard going through a lot of the indie fantasy and indie books that are out there. But once you do find them, you know, you found your new favorite. And that's where I have kind of tried in my YouTube channel to try and signal boost other authors and say, hey, here's this indie author I found. I read the book. This is what I liked about the book. This is what I didn't care for about the book. See if this sounds like the book that's right for you, that you want. I do that instead of, you know, giving them 3 stars or 5 stars, because I generally like most of what I read.
I've been meaning to get to Watcher of the Damned. I keep my selection of books really just boils down to okay, I'm a little burnout for a few days after reading some big old monster thing. It's like, oh, well, this sounds interesting. I'm going to pick that up. Oh, that sounds interesting. I'm going to pick that up. It's I have a lot of time for reading, but you know, once you've read 30-some books within a year, which is a lot for me, probably not considering I'm running a channel about it, but
yeah, my reading time is considerably lessened, especially lately. I've got a son in trade school. I have to bring him back and forth. In fact, I got about 10 minutes left before I have to leave and go get him, just to give you a heads up. But I still try and read. I'm still, you know, supporting as many indie authors as I can in whatever endeavor they're doing. The big conversation that popped off on Twitter not too long ago is, and there's interesting points on both sides, is the indie authors spending so much on their covers versus the ones who are kind of leaning towards AI photo bash stuff to save a few money, to save a few dollars.
Mm-hmm.
I can kind of see why, you know, people would be a little more off put, because a lot of the cheaper covers are saying, look, we're not making, a lot of us aren't making that money back unless you get really big. A lot of your covers, a lot of your indie books, especially indie fantasy, you're not going to make that money back. My friend John Palladino told me when I was interviewing him for, he's the author of The Trials of Ashmount. He had his book professionally edited 3 times, professional cover artist. He dropped about $12,000 developing that book.
Who? Yeah.
Now, let me see. It's right here. You can't look at this and say that this does not catch your eye.
It does.
And you can't read this book and say this is not as polished can be. This is grimdark as hell, but if you like grimdark and you like shit that gets dark, you might like this. But this is you cannot read his book and say this is somebody that didn't put any effort in to giving the best possible product or the best possible book to their readers. I think that really does go a long way in developing the value, you know, in creating the value for your book and showing that your readers, that they care. You could put your book on a web page or Royal Road, and yeah, you could build up a readership there, but the perceived value of, you know, what you write ends up coming through how it looks. It looks professional. You know, I did that. I spent a good bit of money for the cover for my book. I'm happy with it. I'm happy with how it turned out. It looks great. It wasn't even what I initially asked him for, but at the same time, I probably have only made back about half of what I spent for it. And that's not even, I definitely won't make back what I spent in editing for it.
I will say, as far as first books go, I did. So I spent I got my first book edited twice myself. So it really didn't cost me as much as this guy spent. Obviously, I mean,
Yeah.
I think I might have spent $4,000 on art and whatnot for my first book. But I didn't realize half the problems because I had beta readers and stuff. But most of my beta readers read like I did. They didn't notice most of the problems.
Yeah.
Then I had it lav read on the loin stream, and sitting there having someone read your book live without any coaching at all. That was an experience.
Yeah, and a lot of indie authors like to say they struggle with what's called imposter syndrome. I don't have that myself because I have a very self-deprecating sense of humor, and if I'm willing to be the first person to jump up and say I'm not perfect. Yeah, I know this might suck. I'll be the first person to joke that hey, yeah, I suck. But I think being genuine and authentic goes a long way to mitigating that. And that not everyone will like your book, but your readership will find you. And you may have something different than what everyone else is doing, or you may have something very similar to what others are doing. But once they find your readership will separate itself out from everyone else that's reading it. And then the next book you read, they're going to come back for that. And I believe, I believe that goes a long way in mitigating imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm. Well, it can be tough because when you first start out, you have no idea where you stand. Most people have no concept, and writing is an introvert thing. Most of us, I can guarantee in the chat,
Right.
Like how many people do you know? Well, let me pull out one hand here. I'm only going to need about half of it.
It's great to daydream about, accolades and the validation that comes with positive reviews. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm worried about stuff like that too, but I've had enough of a consensus to say, yeah, this is what I wanted it to be. You don't get a second chance to make a first impression. And when it came to writing the Black Crown, I wanted more than anything for it to be a crowd pleaser. I wanted it to be something that felt like you could sit back and be entertained. And go on an adventure with a group of friends that you liked and feel like you were there with them the entire way through the highs and the lows. And then maybe, have a few twists and turns along the way, just so you're not too complacent.
I know that first book is always the toughest. We actually, just on a side tangent, I had somebody in one of my comments mention that they wanted to do a video lampooning their first book. And if he's watching right now, I really hope he doesn't do that, because I think everybody's first book, you should celebrate it even if it's not very good.
Yeah.
You did something most people will never, ever do.
Right. And even if, even if you put that out there, like as long as you're committed to growing your craft and learning and writing more, that's the only way you get better at this. You write more, you read more, you take, inspiration from both in your genre and outside your genre. See what you can glean from different authors, because as long as you're committed to growing your craft, you're only going to get better. I don't think there's any indie authors I don't think there's any authors out there really that look back at their first novel and go, oh, and cringe a little and go, oh, I could have done it so much better. Maybe so, but I've been writing for a long time, and even I'm still growing as a writer. My editor was pointing out things to me that I hadn't considered because I didn't have that outside eyes looking in on my work, aside from other folks in like a more of an amateur setting. I used to do small short stories and post them online, and I would get feedback from folks like that. But at the end of the day, that ends up being amateurs giving advice to other amateurs. At some point, in order to get to the next step, you need to evolve and grow and start listening to more experienced authors or learning from their example.
It's not just that. You got to learn all the things you had no clue of understanding to begin with. There's something going from being a reader to a writer. It's a lot more difficult. You've got hell, when I started, I didn't even know what the word prose meant. As my first books were written in spiral notebooks. Some of the sentences were terrible.
I mean, even as writing as long as I had, like I had never really seen of all the writing advice I had looked at, I'd never heard the rule of don't change character POVs in the middle of a scene. A couple of those did stay in the Black Crown just because there were two characters in the same scene together. But that's a lesson that I had to learn from my editor, and it's a lesson I did not learn before that point. And it's something I have to take into account in future works.
Well, it's just one of those things you're going to have to learn. It's why I'm trying to spend more time on these writers' technicals. Well, we're getting close to our end time here. Let me ask you one more question from my list here. What's the most shocking thing you've discovered since publication? Didn't mean to give you a big head scratcher.
That's a good question. The shocking thing that people actually enjoy my book. There's always that sense of, oh God, they're reading my book. What are they going to have to say about it? And generally the consensus has been pretty positive. The fact that Blaine Lee Pardoe read my book, that man is a veteran monster of a writer and had nothing but good things to say, told me I'm at least on the right track and to keep doing what I'm doing and just, keep doing to get better. For me, it's that probably the biggest shock is that the twists worked as well as I wanted them to work. Mm-hmm. Some people figured a couple of them out. Sorry to get into any spoilers here. Some people figured a couple of them out. Some people didn't. Some people were blown away by them. And some people were like, I was figuring out the whole time. Mm-hmm. And I had so many mental defenses and excuses ready to go when people asked me, like, what did you think this twist was going to work? And I was like, okay, it's okay if you figured it out. Here's why, and go on from there. Mm-hmm. But the general consensus has been that it was a surprise to most people, and most of them were well executed. So I was glad for that.
That first 5-star review you get from somebody you don't know is a shocker, isn't it?
A little bit. I'm still waiting on it. I think I know most of the people that have read the book so far, but a couple of people are not well acquainted with him, come through and said, hey, really enjoyed it. So
I'll tell you, I was surprised at how connected the entire writing community seems to be.
A lot of them, I think it depends on which corner you go into. The indie fantasy community are especially centered a lot around like the booktubers, and that's where a lot of the indie fantasy stuff kind of gets its biggest legs at. And then you have others who are a little more insular, like the Pulp Rev community. They seem to only be interested in reading their books and very old books, and they don't really read much outside of that. And then you got like the romantasy folks that, like I said, and they are shameless in their thirst and what they enjoy. Honestly, I find it kind of funny. And, as long as I kind of take a laughing approach to it, it kind of becomes a bit of a little bit of entertainment for me. You just laugh along with it. Yeah, it's all smut.
As somebody who sat and suffered through both the Light Lark books and the
Fourth
Wing
Soul
books.
Oh my gosh. I was contemplating Fourth Wing. I did not hear great things.
Imagine a fantasy book written entirely in Valley Girl. I should not have read the first book and the second so close together, but the second just came out and it's like, okay, I need to ride this wave while I got it. And it burned me out for a while.
I can understand that. Maybe, who knows? Maybe there's some hidden gem out there. It's like, you know what? This is actually not that bad, but the only way to know is to really dive headfirst into it. And I'm sure that from my perspective, the romantasy genre seems very, very highly saturated with a lot of bubbly girls and moms that seem to really enjoy their new age bodice rippers.
It's
how I see them.
So just a note to everybody out there, just because a woman reads that stuff doesn't mean she's into that stuff. It's one of those things like, hey, it's fun to fantasize about. When it really happens, it's absolutely horrifying.
Yeah. There's a reason they call it fantasy,
Yes.
Lean into it. People are not going out there and fighting battles in midriff bearing armor.
Oh, that reminds me, because I ask it in every interview, so I have to ask you, would you live in the fantasy world you created?
Yeah, I actually would. I don't know where the hell I would fit in at. I'd probably just join the orcs. Like, you guys seem kind of cool. I don't mind fighting stuff every day and eating boar meat constantly. I'll get ripped, man. That'll be great.
Going to join them for dinner.
Yeah, I'll become. I haven't come up with a word for it yet. Court gets a specific title in book 2, and basically translate to trusted orc friend, where he's essentially kind of integrated into their society because he's more like an orc than he is a human. When you really break it down, you did that perfectly. By the way, you have a half orc that acts like an elf and a human that acts like an orc. So where he's kind of got his own little place in their society. I'll just do what he does.
Well, he is. I did like just a bit of spoiler when he gets dropped in the pit with the half orc and he just proceeds to just out orc the half orc.
Yeah, that was fun. Court was furious at that point. He was mad at himself. He was mad at the circumstances, and he wanted to lash out. So he went and found a place to pick a fight.
Well, the thing is, I grew up in Appalachia. I've known more than enough people like Court.
Yeah.
I went to school with such people.
Yeah, and I knew he was a risk. I knew some people probably weren't going to like him. A lot of people were going to find him strangely endearing, even when he's not doing what he should be doing. Also, I got to remember, Court's not terribly bright. So if you come across a plot point at some point in a future book or this book, or go, Court, why would you do something so stupid? Because he's Court. That's why.
I do want to apologize to Chad if you guys have been hearing my stomach gurgling over the past hour. It's because I've been fighting off flu.
Oh my gosh. It's been hitting over here too.
It's that time of year between the allergies and
yeah, they were hitting me a little bit too. I got the flu like 2 months ago. Hamstrung me for like a month with the secondary infections, and now I'm dealing with some of the allergies. Now all my kids got strep. I can't win for losing, and I'm supposed to do a stream tomorrow to talk about the Fallout show. Oh God, I got to get some guests on that because I ain't going to be able to carry it talking.
I would offer to help you out, but I am getting ready to. I had to call out today from work, but I'm getting ready to hit 2 32-hour shifts, or not 32, 2 16-hour shifts in a row.
You got this, bro. You got it.
Oh, I love my job. My job is great. I honestly, I've given up watching most streaming because I'm just going to buy physical media. Most of the shows I watch, like I was enjoying Invincible for a while till the middle part of this recent season.
Oh man, that pissed everybody off. Nobody liked that decision.
Well, I mean, I got to the second episode. I'm like,
I'm only watching Fallout because my son is a huge Fallout fan.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of curious as to how the show does. I watched the first episode, didn't hate it. Definitely some weird plot choices in certain spots. But we'll see how the rest goes. I'm going to go pick him up shortly, and we will binge watch the rest of the show. Talk about it on stream tomorrow.
What service is it on? Is it on Netflix?
It's on Amazon Prime. But I'm right there with you. Like Amazon Prime, I mean, like I don't really have any streaming services. I don't watch streaming at all. It's the indie fantasy is most of what I watch, and YouTube. That's pretty much it. I've been listening recently to Razor Fist narrating the audiobook, The Black Master, one of the Shadow Pulps. And that's been really good. I mean, I really need to get into audiobooks because I could get so much more reading done in the time that I'm driving now. But I've been trying to get done binging Critical Role Campaign 1 so that I can finally put that behind me and start getting into audiobooks.
You should do like I do. Since you run your own YouTube channel, you've got the recording equipment, just make your own. It does take a while.
I have contemplated doing something like that when my voice is at its most acceptable, maybe, but we'll see. It's in the future.
Well, we do have, there's a guy I talked to on Twitter you might want to contact too. He goes by the Sonnet. He does audiobooks. He does pretty good. Go ahead.
I think he reached out to me.
Well, he's definitely a good choice. I did a review on one of the books that he narrated. He's got a good voice. He might fit in with your genre pretty well.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and forth with him a little bit. the cost of a audio book right now is a little prohibitive.
Telling me.
And especially when I'm considering if I want to get the Lionheart out this year, I'm going to have to get that cover very soon, because the last time I waited till the last second to get the cover for the Black Crown, and that bit me in the ass because I got it way too late in the game. If I can give any authors a little bit of advice, I would say go ahead and get your cover out of the way. Make it one of the first things that you do, and just hold on to it. Don't start promoting it with it, though, until it's not long before it's time for it to come out.
That reminds me, I got to finish Battle Games book 2. It's just sitting there ready for publication.
Yeah, we could do a whole thing talking about effectively marketing on social media. But
I would definitely watch that, because I do not market on social media. I laugh at memes and poke fun at people.
I've been doing too much of that. I need to get back to more marketing for myself. But you only have one book for so long. Eventually, you've kind of burned through enough for your readers. Got to get that next book out. But I'm full of stories, and I'm anxious to write more stuff, man.
All right. Well, as our sign off, tell everybody once again who you are and anything you'd like to pitch.
I am author John A. Douglas, sitting here with a frog in my throat. I am the author of The Black Crown, Age of Adventures, Book 1. There's my wife telling me to get off of the computer. You can find this on Amazon. It is available on Kindle Unlimited if you have that, and available in paperback, as you see here. I'm working on the hardcover version right now, guys. Give me a little time. Me and my editor are trying to get it figured out. If you go to my website at johnnydouglas.com and sign up for my newsletter so you never miss an announcement, you can get 5 free chapters of the book to give it a try out. And excuse me. You can find me on YouTube at author John A. Douglas. You can find me on Twitter at BLK Crown Author. I couldn't use my real name anymore.
And go ahead.
You'll find me on Twitter making an ass out of myself on a daily basis.
That's what Twitter is for.
Yes.
Well, I am T. Alex Ratcliffe. I am an author and reviewer. Look forward to Battle Games Book 2 coming out. I have made a lot of changes. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great evening. And hitting the button.